I knew bringing my son into a legacy-obsessed family would be complicated, but I didn't expect them to try erasing him right in front of me. What would you do if the people you love told you that your child didn't deserve a place at your own wedding table? I just hope standing up for him, publicly, wasn't the moment everything fell apart. I'm Marcus. I don't usually do country estates or dress rehearsals, but there I was, stepping out of a rental car into the manicured hellscape my mother calls tradition. My fiancée, Eve, gripped my hand tighter as if sensing the storm beneath my calm. And my son, Jonah, 14, sulking, earbuds in, eyeing the ivy-covered mansion like it was a haunted house. He wasn't wrong. Looks like a wedding catalog threw up on this place, Jonah muttered under his breath. Eve gave him a warm smile. It's temporary. And hey, you clean up nice. Whatever, he grunted, but I saw the corner of his mouth twitch. That was a win. Inside, the air reeked of lemon polish and old money, my mother's domain. She swept down the staircase like royalty, pearls tight around her neck, smile tighter. Marcus, she said, kissing my cheek with all the warmth of a banker closing an account. Then her eyes flicked to Jonah. And Jonah. How unexpected. I didn't miss the pause, neither did Eve, but she didn't flinch. We're thrilled to be here, she said. That's my girl, Grace under fire. Jonah stayed silent, shifting beside me. I placed a hand on his shoulder, grounding us both. Dinner was scheduled, of course. A rehearsal of proper behavior for the following day. Assigned seating, curated wine, polite tension like static between porcelain smiles. As we walked through the halls toward our rooms, the staff trailing with our luggage, I could feel it. The undercurrent. The hush that settles when old money families prepare to pretend they're normal for one night. Later, in the parlor, my mother pulled me aside. You'll sit at the head table, naturally. Just you and Eve. Not the boy. My spine stiffened. He's my son. He's part of this. Her eyebrow arched, that slow, calculated way she wielded disapproval like a dagger. It's not about him. It's optics, you understand. Before I could answer, Eve stepped between us, casual and lethal. Actually, we were hoping Jonah would join us. It's important he feels included. My mother's smile froze. Well, I suppose exceptions can be made for appearances. We knew what she meant. But Eve, she just nodded, her hand sliding into mine, the message clear. United front. That night, after Jonah had retreated to his room, headphones on, gaming quietly, Eve and I sat outside under the twisted limbs of an ancient oak. You okay? She asked softly. Been better. She hates me, Jonah said from the shadows. We turned. He stood there, barefoot in the grass, not looking at us. She doesn't even know you, I said. She doesn't want to. I didn't have a good answer for that. I wanted to say something comforting. But truth has sharp edges, and I've lied enough in my life to know the cost. You're here because you belong here, Eve said firmly. That's not up for debate. He looked at her then. Really looked. Maybe for the first time. You mean that? She nodded. Every word. And in the silence that followed, I realized this weekend wasn't about rehearsal dinners or fancy table settings. It was about legacy. And who gets to sit at the table? I woke up to the sound of rain tapping against the window. Soft, persistent, like a warning no one wanted to say out loud. The estate looked different in daylight. Less majestic, more exposed. You could see every crack in the marble, every faded thread in the curtain. But the performance was still on. Staff moved like stagehands, setting tables, fluffing floral arrangements. Everything in its right place. Except us. Jonah dragged his feet into the breakfast room, hoodie up, eyes bloodshot from too much screen time. My mother didn't even try to mask her disapproval. She stirred her tea like it was plotting something. We'll be assigning seating today, she announced, addressing the room but clearly speaking to Eve and me. The head table must remain traditional. Meaning, no kids, no exceptions. Eve didn't blink. She sipped her coffee slowly, then turned to Jonah. You want eggs? He shrugged. Not hungry. He'll sit with us, Eve said, loud enough to cut through the room like glass underfoot. My mother smiled. Tight. Fake. Of course. It's your wedding, after all. No one believed her. Least of all, Jonah. Later, while Eve helped with centerpieces, Jonah and I took a walk through the orchard. The trees were half dead, gnarled and tangled, like they were trying to claw their way out of this place too. So this is the part where everyone pretends we're a happy family, he asked. I laughed, because what else could I do? Yeah, pretty much. He kicked a rock down the path. Why did you even bring me? That one hit harder than it should have. Because you're my son. You deserve to be here. He stopped walking. They don't want me here. They look at me like I'm a stain on the tablecloth. They look at me the same way, I admitted. That got a small snort from him. Guess that makes us both stains. No, I said, stepping in front of him. We're not stains. We're what's real in this mess. We stood there, surrounded by trees older than either of us would ever be, and for a second he didn't look so angry. Just tired. Back at the house, Eve was waiting. She'd done something subtle, moved a single place card. It sat now at the head table beside mine, Jonah's name printed clean and clear. You're not serious, my mother hissed when she saw it. That spot is for family. Eve's voice was calm, but there was steel underneath. He is family. My mother's lips parted like she was about to issue a royal decree. But before she could speak, guests started filtering in. Too late to throw a tantrum now. As they gathered, Eve linked arms with me, then with Jonah. She looked radiant and untouchable. He belongs with us, she whispered. And just like that, a war had been declared, fought not with swords, but seating arrangements and quiet defiance. And for the first time, I was ready for it. The storm came in the form of murmurs, not thunder. They started the second we entered the drawing room. You'd think we walked in dragging chains behind us, the way heads turned. Whispers rode the air like perfume, subtle, poisonous. Eve wore red. It wasn't a dress meant to fade into the background. It screamed confidence, defiance. And Jonah? He didn't hide behind his hoodie today. He wore the suit she picked out for him, slightly oversized, tie askew, but present. My mother's eyes swept over him like a scan for defects. She found plenty. You can still change your mind, she said to me under her breath, hand on my arm. It's not too late to do this, right? I am, I replied, voice even. Doing it right. She smiled, brittle as porcelain, and turned away. Aunts, uncles, cousins, they all made their entrances bearing gifts and loaded glances. When Jonah tried to help carry in a box of programs, one of my mother's sisters took it from him. Careful, she said. We wouldn't want you to get in the way. Jonah froze. I stepped in. He's helping, I said, sharper than I meant to. She handed the box back without meeting my eyes. Later, in the cocktail hour, Eve made her move. She was mid-conversation with some cousin twice removed when she turned, hand on Jonah's shoulder, and said, This is Jonah. He's our future. I swear the air went out of the room. She said it like it was fact, like anyone who disagreed would be arguing with the weather. Someone coughed. Another shifted their drink. But most just blinked and smiled. That tight, rehearsed family smile that meant, We heard you. We didn't like it, but we'll pretend. Jonah stared at her, stunned. He wasn't used to being spoken about like that. Not here. Not ever. One of my uncles, old money and older opinions, raised his glass politely, lips thin. How? Progressive, he said. Eve's smile didn't falter. Not really, just honest. Later, in a rare quiet moment, I found Jonah by the back patio, staring out at the rain-softened lawn. You okay? I asked. He shrugged. She really meant that. I didn't answer with words. Just sat beside him and placed the heirloom box in his lap. He looked at me, confused. What is this? Something you'll understand soon. He opened the lid slowly, reverently. Inside was the pocket watch, my father's, and his father's before that, polished, ticking quietly. Still alive. Jonah blinked. It's yours, I said. His breath caught. But it's been passed down for generations, I told him, and I'm passing it to mine. He touched the metal like it might burn him. They're going to hate this. I looked him straight in the eye. Let them. By the time dinner began, the tension was a living thing. It clung to the air like humidity, thick and heavy. We were escorted to our seats by staff trained in the art of avoidance. Eyes forward, no reaction, no opinion. But even they hesitated when they saw Jonah's place card at the head table. My mother's eyes narrowed as we approached. Eve was on my right. Jonah on my left, the family banner stitched together not by blood, but by stubborn love. And I could feel her unraveling. Is this final? She asked, gesturing at the seat. Eve placed her hand gently on Jonah's back and smiled like a woman with nothing left to lose. It is. The room quieted just enough for us to notice it. A ripple of realization. Jonah, the boy they'd spent years treating like a footnote, now positioned at the center of everything. As Jonah pulled out his chair and sat down, I caught the exact moment my mother's composure cracked. Her lips flattened. Her hand trembled ever so slightly as she reached for her water glass. Dinner began with speeches, toasts, polite laughter. The usual parade of performative affection, but I barely registered it. All I could see was Jonah trying to sit straight, shoulders tense, fork in the wrong hand. A boy trying not to mess up in a room wired to record his every misstep. He was halfway through his salad when the first real blow landed. "She's made quite a statement, hasn't she?" my aunt whispered to the cousin beside her. Not whispered enough. Eve heard it. So did Jonah. His fork paused midair. His eyes dropped to the table. I leaned in close. "Keep eating." He nodded, jaw clenched. Then came the second wave. An older cousin, one of the ones who only showed up when there was free food or family gossip, leaned across the table toward Jonah. "So, what's it like?" he asked, voice loud and lazy. Getting the seat usually meant for someone born into the family? I stood so fast my chair screeched backward, but Eve beat me to it. "He was born into the family," she said coolly. "He's Marcus's son. That makes him legacy." The cousin laughed uncomfortably. "Right, of course." Eve didn't break eye contact. "And he'll inherit what matters, whether anyone here likes it or not." Silence followed. Real silence. The kind that wraps around a room and dares anyone to break it. Jonah looked at her, eyes wide. He wasn't used to being defended. "Not like that." My mother cleared her throat. "Perhaps we can all just enjoy the evening without drama." Eve raised her glass, eyes never leaving Jonah. "To family," she said. "All of it." And for the first time, Jonah raised his glass too. His hand trembled slightly, but he held it up. "To family," he echoed. Across the table, my mother looked away. It was the clink of crystal that drew attention, but it was my mother's voice that sliced the air. "Enough." She stood slowly, deliberately. Every eye in the room turned to her as if summoned. Her pearls caught the light, gleaming like teeth. I knew that tone. So did everyone else. It was the one she used before a verdict, before a punishment, before she made sure everyone remembered exactly who ran this family. "This charade has gone far enough," she said, voice steady but cold. "I've tolerated the spectacle, the gestures, but I won't stand by while this family is redefined in front of my face." I didn't move. Neither did Eve. But Jonah, he froze, mid-chew, mid-breath. I could feel the shame blooming off of him like smoke. My mother took a single step forward. "That boy has no place at this table." The words weren't loud, but they hit like thunder. There were gasps. Forks paused midair. The clatter of someone dropping a spoon onto fine china. Jonah stared at his plate. Like, if he didn't move, maybe it wouldn't be real. My heart thudded so hard I could hear it in my ears. But I didn't explode. I didn't scream. Not yet. Instead, Eve stood, slowly, deliberately. She stepped around the table and placed her arm around Jonah's shoulders. She didn't say a word. She didn't have to. Her presence said everything. Jonah looked up at her, then at me, his eyes glassy, face red. "I didn't ask to sit here," he said quietly. I rose then, not to perform, not to plead, just to stand beside my son. "You don't have to justify anything to anyone," I said, eyes on my mother. She tilted her head, that smug curve to her mouth returning. "This isn't personal, Marcus. It's about preserving tradition, respecting lineage." I walked around the table and stood between her and Jonah. "You mean hiding him?" "Again, don't twist this." "You're twisting it," I said, louder now. "He's my son. He's our family. And if this table doesn't have space for him, then it has no place for me either." A heavy silence followed. Some looked away. Others looked down. But Eve? She tightened her arm around Jonah. She didn't flinch. "We came here for unity," she said softly. "But maybe we were naive to expect it." My mother stared at us like we were aliens, like she didn't recognize her own blood anymore. "This isn't over," she said. But it was. She just didn't know it yet. The pocket watch gleamed under the chandelier's filtered light, small and steady in Jonah's palm. He held it like it might disappear if he blinked, eyes locked on the face ticking forward. 1 second, then another. I cleared my throat. "It's been passed down through 4 generations. My father gave it to me the night I graduated law school." Jonah didn't say anything, just ran his thumb over the smooth surface like he was afraid to break it. "I'm giving it to you now," I said. Heads turned. Conversations dimmed. And suddenly, the air in the room wasn't just tense. It was watching. At the far end of the table, my mother stilled, wine glass suspended midair. I could feel her stare drilling through me. "You sure?" Jonah asked, voice low. I nodded. "It's yours now." The applause started slowly. Eve clapped first, eyes shining with something fierce and proud. Then someone else joined in. Scattered, uneven. It wasn't celebratory. It was cautious, polite. As if they were clapping not for the gesture, but for how gracefully I'd staged it. I looked around the table at faces I'd grown up with. Family, yes, but familiar in the way shadows are familiar. They knew what this meant. This wasn't just a gift. It was a declaration. Jonah, my son, our son, was being claimed. And not everyone liked that. After dinner, while the guests lingered over espresso and dessert, I found myself surrounded by polite smiles and empty questions. My cousin Lucian leaned in, swirling his drink like the room was his stage. "Quite the statement, cousin," he said. "The watch, I mean. It's usually passed at a coming of age, a graduation, a wedding." I sipped my coffee. "He's earned it." Lucian raised an eyebrow. "Has he?" I didn't answer. Because I didn't need to. A few steps away, Jonah stood stiffly beside Eve, clearly overwhelmed by all the attention. He wasn't used to this. Being seen, being talked about. He'd spent years at the edge of the frame. Now he was front and center, and the spotlight was burning. "You okay?" I asked, approaching him. He shrugged. "It's a lot." Eve wrapped an arm around his shoulder. "You handled it like a pro." He looked down at the watch again. "What if I mess it up?" I crouched a little so we were eye level. "You won't." And then, because I knew the wolves were circling, I added, "And even if you do, you'll still be ours." From across the room, my mother stood near the fireplace, silent, unmoving, watching us like a chess player eyeing her next move. But tonight, the first piece had already moved, and she hadn't seen it coming. They tried to smile through it. The head table was always meant to be symbolic, a curated display of legacy, order, belonging, which made Jonah's presence an act of war. He sat between me and Eve, stiff as a statue, the pocket watch now hidden in his jacket pocket, but somehow still radiating heat. Across from him, my mother's expression was unreadable. That was worse than anger. It meant she was calculating. My uncle stirred his soup as if it held answers. Aunt Caroline adjusted her napkin with the precision of someone stalling for composure. A cousin whispered to her date, and they both glanced at Jonah, then quickly looked away. "I feel like I'm on a different planet," Jonah muttered. Eve leaned in, her voice low. "That's okay. Sometimes a different planet is exactly what they need." The appetizers came and went, unnoticed. Jonah barely touched his food. Neither did I. Midway through the main course, my mother finally spoke. "So, Jonah," she said sweetly, too sweetly, "are you enjoying the festivities?" Jonah glanced at her, hesitant. "I guess." "You guess," she repeated with a gentle laugh. "Well, it's a lot to take in. All this tradition. All this history." "Yeah," Jonah said. "It's definitely a lot." Her fork paused above her plate. "It takes time to understand legacy. It's not just about where you sit. It's about where you come from." Eve sat up straighter. "He knows exactly where he comes from." I placed my hand on Jonah's shoulder, firm but reassuring. "And where he's going," I added. "We all do." There it was again. That ripple through the table, like a wave passing beneath a fragile surface. The guests pretended to sip wine, to study their menus. But they were listening. My mother smiled again, but this time it didn't reach her eyes. "Well," she said, voice smooth as glass, "I suppose every family has its transitions." Then she turned to the cousin next to her and changed the subject, as if the moment hadn't just unspooled like a threat between courses. But the damage was done. The table had heard it. The question wasn't whether Jonah belonged, it was whether the family could pretend he didn't. And after tonight, that answer was no longer up to them. She waited until the second glass of wine had been poured, until everyone was comfortably distracted by lamb racks and potato soufflés, until Jonah's guard was down, laughter flickering at something Eve had said. That's when she did it. My mother stood. No toast, no warning. Just rose from her chair like a queen about to deliver a decree. The room quieted. Knives paused mid-slice. Conversation stalled. She placed both hands on the back of her chair and smiled, slow and deliberate. "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room." I already knew. I felt it in my spine, in my pulse. But still, I hoped. God, I hoped she wouldn't go there. Some of you may be wondering why certain choices were made for the head table, she said, eyes on the guests, but her voice locked onto Jonah like a sniper's scope. Why tradition was stretched. I opened my mouth, but Eve's hand on my arm was a quiet, urgent warning. Wait. My mother took a step around her chair, her voice tightening. I've held my tongue out of respect for this occasion, for appearances. But I will not sit idly by and watch this family forget who we are. No one breathed. She turned, finally facing us directly. That boy, she said, actually pointing, at Jonah, has no place at this table. A collective gasp rippled around us. Jonah froze, eyes wide, shoulders curling like he could shrink himself into the chair. Mother, I started, voice shaking. No, she snapped. Enough dancing around. He is not a part of this lineage. He is not part of this family. Not truly. Stop, I said, louder now. She didn't. You may have made your choices, Marcus, but you don't get to rewrite our history for convenience, or guilt, or... I said, stop, I growled, rising from my chair, my napkin falling to the floor. But it was Eve who stood next. Not loud, not dramatic, just calm. She walked around the table and stood beside Jonah, placing both hands on his shoulders like a shield. Don't speak to him again, she said. Quiet, firm, final. My mother blinked. You don't get to wound a child just because you're afraid he'll become something you can't control, Eve continued. He belongs, not because you say so, not because he fits into your antique photograph of a family, but because we say so, because love built this table, not blood. The silence was deafening. Eve looked at Jonah. You don't have to move, and he didn't, even as my mother turned and stormed away from the table. Even as the whispers started, even as half the family stared like they were watching the slow, elegant unraveling of a dynasty. He didn't move. He stayed, right where he belonged. I don't remember finishing my meal. I don't remember dessert arriving, or the waitstaff quietly collecting plates with professional indifference, like they hadn't just witnessed a public bloodletting. I remember Jonah sitting there, eyes glued to the tablecloth, as if looking up might confirm that the world really had shifted. It had. Eve never left his side. She kept a hand on his shoulder, steady as stone. And when I looked at her, she gave me a nod. Not of approval, but of warning. Stay calm. Stay focused. So I did. But inside, I was burning. Later, after the table was cleared and the guests dispersed into smaller clumps, some clinging to their champagne, others to gossip, I found Jonah sitting alone on the steps outside the ballroom. His jacket was folded beside him. The pocket watch was back in his hand. He didn't look up when I sat down. She meant it, he said quietly. She really hates me. No, I said. She hates the idea of you. What's the difference? I didn't have a good answer. Jonah stared at the watch again. I shouldn't have come. My throat tightened. Don't say that. I thought maybe if I just tried hard enough I could prove something. Be part of it. Make her see me differently. I turned toward him. Look at me. He didn't. Jonah. He lifted his head, eyes red, jaw tight. You are not the one who needs to prove anything, but I'm the one everyone's looking at like I don't belong. They're looking at you, I said, because they see the future and they're scared of it. Scared it doesn't look like the past. But that's not your burden. His lips trembled. Feels like it. I reached out, placing a hand on the back of his neck. You don't owe them a thing. Not a smile, not a performance, not forgiveness. He nodded slowly, but the sadness stayed. From inside, laughter erupted, forced, sharp, the kind that tastes like denial. I looked over my shoulder and saw my mother surrounded by her loyal few, smiling too widely, too quickly. She's already rewriting it, I muttered, telling them it was a misunderstanding, that she was taken out of context. Jonah glanced at me. Will they believe her? I exhaled. Some will. Others won't. But either way, we don't need them. He looked back at the watch. Why me? Because you don't pretend. Because you show up. And because when I think about who I want to carry this family forward, it's not someone who knows which wineglass to use. He cracked the smallest smile. Good. I hate wine. That's when Eve appeared, carrying 3 mugs of coffee. She handed one to Jonah without a word and took her place beside us. We're not leaving, she said softly. Not tonight. And we didn't. We stayed right there on those steps, the 3 of us. Uninvited by tradition, unshaken by rejection, unmovable. The room had thinned out, but the whispers hadn't. That's how family wars work in estates like this. Battles fought not in outbursts, but in glances, side comments, and polite avoidance. And tonight, it was open season. Eve and I stood by the drinks table while Jonah kept close to the edge of the room, fiddling with the chain of the watch, pretending not to hear them. "He's very present," someone muttered behind me. "He's not even hers," another whispered. "Just a stray Marcus dragged in. It didn't matter if we heard." That was the point. Eve's grip on her wineglass tightened. "They're circling." I followed her gaze. My mother had migrated toward the fireplace, surrounded by a growing flock. The old guard. Those who still used words like legacy and standards like they were gospel. They nodded along to whatever narrative she was spinning, eyes occasionally darting our way. I could guess the story. Marcus had changed. Eve was the problem. Jonah was a phase. "Bloodlines matter," someone muttered as we passed. Not loud, but loud enough. Eve stopped walking. "What did you say?" The man, some second cousin I barely knew, blinked like a deer caught in headlights. "I didn't mean—" "You meant exactly what you said," she cut in, voice like ice. "And you said it loud enough for a child to hear." Jonah stepped closer, confused. "What's going on?" "Nothing," Eve said, brushing it off with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just some old ghost talking." I pulled her aside as the man slunk away. "They're not going to stop," I said. "They've picked their side." "And we've picked ours," she said. "We're not here to win them over. We're here to show him what standing your ground looks like." I nodded, but it didn't feel like enough. The rejection, the venom, it wasn't quiet anymore. It was spreading. Later, I found Jonah by the piano, alone. He looked up as I approached, but didn't say anything. "Bad night?" I asked. He shrugged. "Not great. You know they're wrong, right?" "I know," he said, but the way he said it told me he didn't believe it. Not fully. He turned the watch over in his hands again. "They act like I'm poison." "You're not, but they don't see me. Not really." "No," I said. "They see your potential. That's what scares them." "Why?" "Because it doesn't look like them." He nodded, quiet for a long time. "Do I have to come tomorrow?" he asked, voice small. I looked at him, this kid who never asked for any of this, who had shown up and tried, who now carried the weight of a legacy no one had prepared him for. "Yes," I said, "because it's yours too, whether they like it or not." Jonah was gone. I found his empty suit jacket draped over the back of a dining chair, his watch tucked neatly in the inside pocket, like he'd been careful with everything but himself. The panic didn't come all at once. It crept. First, a quick scan of the parlor, then the back patio, then the halls. Nothing. Not a glimpse. Not a shadow. I finally caught Eve's eye across the room. "He's not here," I mouthed. She didn't ask questions. She just moved. The estate was large enough to lose someone and old enough to keep secrets. I checked the library first, then the study, then the side garden where the caterers smoked between shifts. No one had seen him. Eve met me near the front entrance, breath quick. "Anything?" I shook my head. "No," she cursed under her breath. This was too much, too soon. "He didn't say anything." "He shouldn't have had to," she snapped. "He's a kid. He shouldn't need to carry the weight of your mother's spite." I closed my eyes, heart hammering. "I'll check the guest wing again," she said, already turning. I found him 20 minutes later in the east corridor, tucked into a window alcove behind heavy curtains. Knees pulled to his chest, hoodie back on, face buried in his arms. He didn't hear me at first. I knelt down slowly, keeping my voice low. "Jonah." His shoulders tensed. "I just wanted to disappear," he muttered, voice rough. "I didn't want to ruin anything." "You didn't ruin anything." He looked up, eyes red, but not from crying, from holding everything in. "They hate me." "No," I said. "They hate losing control. There's a difference." Jonah sniffed. "You don't get it." "I do, more than you think." He shook his head. "You belong here. You know which fork to use. You make speeches. People listen to you." "I've spent half my life pretending I'm okay with rooms like this," I said. "But I only started telling the truth when I met your mother. And I only started being myself when I became yours." His eyes widened a little. I sat beside him, back against the cold wall. "I used to think family meant blood and tradition, the pocket watch, the estate, the name." I looked at him. "But none of that means a damn thing if it doesn't include you." Jonah didn't say anything for a long time. Then he asked, barely above a whisper, "So, what now?" I reached into my coat and pulled out the watch. "Now you put this back on." He stared at it. "And then tomorrow," I said, "you walk in with your head up. Because you are the future, whether they're ready or not." He took the watch. This time, with no hesitation. He didn't sleep in the guest room that night. Jonah dragged his blankets into our suite without saying a word, curled up on the armchair, and stayed there like a ghost in the corner. I woke up at 3 a.m. and found him staring out the window, the glow of the hallway nightlight bouncing off the brass of the pocket watch he held like a lifeline. I didn't ask what he was thinking. I just sat on the edge of the bed and waited. "You think they'll ever see me different?" he finally asked, voice low and raw. "I don't care if they do," I said. "I care if you do." He nodded slowly. "I just thought maybe this would be different." I understood. He'd come here thinking a wedding meant a reset, a new start, a declaration that he was part of something, that he belonged. But my family didn't do declarations. They did masks. "And if you didn't fit into the portrait, you were painted over. You did everything right," I said. "It's them that failed." He looked at me. "Does it always feel like this?" "Only until you stop waiting for their approval." Morning came gray and reluctant. The sky still hung with the weight of the night before. Guests wandered in for breakfast, pretending nothing had happened, their voices lighter, their smiles more forced. But you could feel it. The shift. The moment Jonah stepped into the dining room, silence fell. He wore the watch again, tucked into his belt loop. Not flashy, not performative, just there. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. I watched him move through the room with a quiet steadiness, like he had nothing to prove anymore. And maybe he didn't. Maybe showing up, again and again, was the proof. Then I saw my mother. She was seated near the window, whispering with two of the older relatives, ones who still called her dear and believed the family name was a holy relic. I started to turn toward them, but Jonah caught my sleeve. "Don't," he said. I looked at him, startled. "She's not worth it," he added. He didn't say it with anger or bitterness, just clarity, and I realized he was right. Eve came over, sliding a croissant onto Jonah's plate. "Hungry?" He nodded. "Starving." We sat together, the three of us, not trying to reclaim the room, just claiming each other. And as I poured coffee and listened to Eve tell Jonah about the honeymoon destination we still hadn't revealed, I felt it. Something solid forming in the space between us. It wasn't respect from the family. It was something better. It was truth. I should have known she wouldn't let it go. After breakfast, while Eve chatted with guests and Jonah helped the event planner string lights in the courtyard, I went back upstairs to grab the speech I'd written for the rehearsal dinner. It wasn't great, too polished, too careful, but it was the kind of thing expected from me. I was halfway down the hallway when I heard her voice. My mother, low, urgent, just around the corner. I slowed my steps. "We cannot let this stand," she was saying, clipped and venomous. "If Marcus insists on legitimizing that boy, he's throwing away everything your father built." She was speaking to Aunt Marianne and Uncle Peter, and two of the cousins she'd gathered the night before like soldiers preparing for siege. "He's embarrassing the family," she hissed, "dragging that child into a spotlight he has no right to. I won't allow it." The air thickened. "Father wouldn't have wanted this," Marianne said, quieter. "He would have left the estate in Tyler's name," my mother snapped. "Not Marcus, and certainly not to some bastard who doesn't even carry our blood." My heart stopped. There it was, said aloud. Not implied, not whispered, declared. I should have stormed in. I should have confronted her. But I didn't. Not yet. I stood frozen, listening as she lowered her voice again. "I'll see the marriage ruined if I have to. If that's what it takes to protect the name." The words hit harder than I thought possible, not because they surprised me, but because they didn't. When I walked away, I didn't go back to the dining room. I went straight to Eve. She was near the fountain, helping Jonah position candles for the evening ceremony. I waited until she was alone. I heard her. Eve looked up at me. "What did she say?" "That she'll ruin the wedding if it means keeping him out of the family." Her expression didn't change. But something behind her eyes hardened. "She's afraid," Eve said simply. "Of him? Of what he represents. Change. Exposure. The fact that she doesn't control the story anymore." I nodded slowly. "She's doubling down." "Then so are we," Eve said, with a quiet certainty that made me love her even more. When Jonah came over a moment later, cheeks flushed from the sun, smiling as he wiped wax off his hands, we didn't tell him what we'd heard. We just stood beside him, closer than ever, unbreakable. I didn't wait for dinner. I didn't wait for the toasts, or the speeches, or the polite small talk meant to pad the space between betrayals. I stood from my chair as soon as the plates were cleared, the clink of silver still echoing through the hall. Every head turned before I said a word. I didn't look at anyone but my mother. She was halfway through a glass of wine, her expression placid, untouched by consequence. "This won't take long," I said, my voice low but clear. The room stilled. A tension you could drink filled the air, thicker than the wine, sharper than the crystal. I stepped forward. "There's been a lot said this weekend, most of it in whispers, most of it aimed at my son." The word hung there, son, final, undeniable. I scanned the table slowly, making sure they heard me, all of them. "You've talked about tradition, about legacy, about bloodlines." I took a breath. Let me be clear. Let me be clear. Jonah is mine. He is part of me, which means he is part of this family." A few faces twitched. Most stayed frozen. "He's not a stain on our name," I continued. "He's the reason it still means something." I turned to Jonah then. He sat motionless, Eve's hand over his, eyes wide with disbelief. "I don't care who's uncomfortable. I don't care who disapproves. I will not sit quietly while people I love are diminished to protect the comfort of those who never earned it." My voice wavered, but I didn't stop. "You want to protect a name? Start by acting like it means something." Eve stood too, slowly, never letting go of Jonah's hand. Beside us, no one moved, until the silence was pierced, not with applause, but a murmur, soft, skeptical. My mother. She rose, setting down her glass. "Well," she said with perfect poise, "we always knew you'd choose sentiment over sense." I faced her, unblinking. "You think this is about sentiment," I said. "This is about truth." She gave a tight smile. "And what a convenient version of truth it is, one that rewrites history to justify weakness." Gasps fluttered from the corners of the room. She didn't flinch. "You may believe you're making a stand, Marcus," she added, "but all you're doing is erasing your father's legacy. He would be ashamed." The room turned cold, not from her words, but from the way she twisted mine. I looked back at Jonah. He hadn't moved, but his hand was holding Eve's tighter now. And that was enough. That was everything. I didn't respond to her. I didn't need to. The stand had already been made. It didn't take long for the spin to begin. By the time dessert arrived, my mother had retaken her place at the table, calm and composed, like nothing had happened. Like she hadn't just weaponized the ghost of my father to turn the room against me. "She's unraveling," Eve whispered. "No," I said, watching the faces around us. "She's regrouping." Because it wasn't just her. It was the ripple effect. Uncle Peter leaned into his wife, shaking his head. Cousin Lydia muttered something about disrespect and impulse. Even Lucian, who had smirked through most of the evening, was now looking at Jonah like he'd been caught trespassing on sacred ground. And my mother? She played her role perfectly, smiling faintly, accepting sympathy from her loyal few, hands folded like a grieving matriarch. I stood by my truth, but she was rewriting the narrative, and she knew the rules of this place better than I ever had. "She's making you the villain," Eve said, "framing this as betrayal. She's good at it." "No," Jonah said quietly, "she's just practiced." He hadn't spoken much since my outburst, but now his voice was steady. "Sure, I see it now," he continued. "They don't hate me. They hate that you chose me." I looked at him, stunned. His shoulders were squared. His hands weren't shaking. And in that moment, he didn't look like a boy at all. "She wanted a clean picture," he said, "and we didn't fit." I couldn't speak. Couldn't tell him how proud I was. Because if I did, I'd break. Jonah turned his gaze toward the table, calm and sharp. "She can have her story," he said, "but she doesn't get to tell mine." And there it was. The moment she lost. She just didn't know it yet. The clink of glasses was dulled this time. No laughter, no buzz of champagne-drenched joy. Just silence coated in politeness, the kind that suffocates. My mother sat poised at her end of the table, lips tight, eyes forward, as if the evening could still be salvaged with the right display of grace. Across from her, Jonah traced the edge of his plate with a fork, still and composed, the watch just barely visible beneath the cuff of his sleeve. Then Eve stood. No warning, no prompting. Just rose, glass in hand, the room tilting toward her instinctively. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even clear her throat, She just looked out across the table, her face soft and unapologetically resolute. "I'd like to make a toast." My mother blinked, clearly caught off guard. Too late to stop it, too early to dismiss it. Eve turned slightly, first to me, then to Jonah. "When Marcus and I decided to get married," she began, "we didn't talk much about seating charts, or menus, or flower arrangements. We talked about who we wanted by our side. A few guests shifted, unsure if this was a wedding speech or a challenge. It was both. We didn't care about traditions, or rules written by people who only knew how to protect their own reflection. We cared about truth, loyalty, love." She looked down the table. "Things you can't inherit, things you have to choose." The silence grew thick. My mother's face had gone pale, her grip on her glass white-knuckled. "Jonah isn't just part of this family. He's the heart of it," Eve said, voice rising just enough to reach every corner of the room. "Because he shows up, because he doesn't pretend, because he loves even when he's not welcomed." She raised her glass. "To legacy. Not the kind etched in old photographs or locked in dusty boxes, but the kind we build ourselves, with courage, with choice." I stood beside her, glass in hand. So did Jonah. But the rest? Some raised their glasses hesitantly. Others didn't move at all. The silence after the toast was loud, uncomfortable, stubborn. My mother didn't drink. She didn't even look up, but she'd heard it. Every word. And this time, the story didn't belong to her. It was Marianne who broke first. After Eve's toast, while the room sat suspended in tension like a dropped glass still spinning on the floor, my sister stood. Her face was pale, hands trembling just enough to betray the storm inside her. She didn't raise her glass. She didn't clear her throat. She just stepped back from the table and left the room. No one followed. 10 minutes later, I found her in the old library, clutching something small and worn in both hands. Her back was to me, but I knew the shape of the box before she even turned around. The Bible. The old family Bible that had been passed down like folklore. Half scripture, half storage unit. It held photos, receipts, notes. No one read anymore. And something else. "I wasn't going to say anything," Marianne said quietly, not looking at me. "But after what she said tonight," her voice cracked, "she doesn't speak for all of us, Marcus. Not anymore." She opened the Bible carefully, pages soft from age. Inside the cover, tucked behind a brittle baptism certificate, was a folded envelope, yellowed, sealed in wax. She handed it to me. "I found this after Dad died. I wasn't supposed to. She must have forgotten it was in here." I peeled back the wax. Inside was a deed, the family farm, signed over. Not to me, not to Marianne, not to any of the other acceptable heirs who sat in smug judgment every holiday, but to Jonah, my son. In my father's handwriting, faded but certain, to Jonah, my grandson. "May this land one day feel like home to you." I read it 3 times, then looked up at her. Marianne's eyes were already wet. "He knew." "Knew what?" "That your son was the one who needed a place, not the one with the cleanest bloodline, the one with the strongest heart." I couldn't breathe. All these years of quiet judgment, of my mother rewriting the family rules in real time, and the truth had been hiding in that old book, waiting. "Why now?" I asked. "Because I watched her poison a room tonight," she said. "And for once I couldn't pretend I didn't taste it too." I clutched the letter. The weight of it wasn't in the paper. It was in the undoing, the unraveling of every lie they'd built this legacy on, and the quiet, undeniable proof that my son had been chosen by the only man whose name they still worshipped. I looked back at the page, at my father's signature, and felt something shift. Tomorrow, everything would change. They didn't believe it at first. I walked into the drawing room with the letter in hand, Eve and Jonah flanking me like sentinels. Conversation stumbled to a halt. Chairs shifted. Every gaze turned toward us, curious, wary. My mother stood near the fireplace again, still holding court. Her expression faltered the second she saw the envelope. She knew it before I said a word. "This was found in the family Bible," I said, holding the deed up. My voice didn't shake. "Written by my father, signed, witnessed, legal." I stepped forward. "It transfers ownership of the family farm. Not to Marianne, not to me, but to Jonah." A gasp broke across the room. Quick and sharp, like glass cracking. "This is a forgery," my mother spat. "It's not," Marianne said, stepping out from behind us. "I found it. I kept it, and I should have spoken up sooner. My mother paled, reaching out to the back of a chair as if the room had tilted. He would never. He did, I said. He saw Jonah, long before the rest of you did. Lucian leaned forward, voice hesitant. That's not possible. He never even met him. He met what mattered, Eve said. He saw the future, and he chose it. The murmuring began then, louder this time, confused and scattered. Uncle Peter asked to see the letter. Cousin Lydia clutched her pearls like the estate had just been robbed. Jonah hadn't moved. He stood beside me, silent, watching it all happen like someone watching a storm from behind glass. You can't let this happen, my mother said, turning to Marianne now, desperation creeping into her voice. I didn't let anything, Marianne replied. He made a choice, and I'm finally respecting it. For the first time, my mother looked cornered. Not outraged, not composed, but cornered. You don't understand what this does, she whispered. No, I said. I understand exactly what it does. It undoes you. And just like that, the truth wasn't a whisper anymore. It was a roar. It was subtle at first. Aunt Caroline was the first to speak to Jonah directly. She approached slowly, as if crossing some invisible boundary, and placed her hand on his shoulder with a hesitancy that betrayed her guilt. I didn't know, she murmured. Jonah looked up, startled, but didn't pull away. Then came Cousin Lydia. No pearls this time. Just a quiet, I'm sorry, before retreating like she'd entered the wrong room. The room was shifting, and not just in silence. Chairs pulled closer. Conversations restarted, this time with glances toward Jonah that didn't hold suspicion but something more complicated, curiosity, respect even. Lucian, of all people, walked over and extended a hand. Jonah hesitated, but then he stood and shook it. It was awkward, stiff, but it happened. The murmurs had changed now, not of gossip, but of realignment. I watched as guests approached my son, not because they were told to, not because it was expected, but because the truth had left them no other choice. Even Uncle Peter, who had once said lineage was sacred, gave Jonah a firm nod and a quiet, "Your grandfather must have seen something in you." Eve stepped beside me, linking her arm through mine. "This doesn't erase what they did," I said. "No," she agreed, "but it rewrites what happens next." My mother remained seated, glass untouched. Her allies had drifted, like smoke without fire. Marianne stood near her but didn't offer comfort. Instead, she turned to Jonah and said, "Clear enough for the room to hear. It's good to have you home." Jonah blinked, then smiled. Not wide, not theatrical, but real. And in that smile, the air in the room changed completely. Not with cheers, not yet, but with something quieter, respect. The sun set slow and golden across the estate, casting long shadows over the lawn. The table, the people who'd spent the weekend hiding behind names and silverware, and yet, when we sat down for the final dinner, the real one, there were no masks left to wear, no assigned seating this time. Jonah walked ahead of us and didn't even pause. He went straight to the head table, sat in the same chair where he'd been humiliated not 2 nights ago. This time, no one moved to stop him. Eve followed, then me. It was quiet at first, not tense, just reverent. Like everyone knew the moment was bigger than the food, bigger than the family name carved into the beams above us. Jonah pulled the watch from his pocket and placed it beside his plate. A symbol, not a trophy. And slowly, one by one, people lifted their glasses. No toasts were announced, no speeches, just raised hands, raised eyes, quiet nods of recognition. To him, to us. Aunt Caroline clinked hers against Jonah's. "Welcome home," she said. Lucian leaned in and said, "Your grandfather would have liked you." Marianne smiled across the table like she'd finally exhaled something heavy. And then Eve raised her glass. "To the heir at the table," she said. "Not because of blood, but because of heart." And this time the room didn't hesitate. Glasses clinked. Cheers rose. No more whispers. No more side eyes. Just the sound of a family unlearning its own rules. Jonah looked up at me, overwhelmed, eyes shining in the candlelight. "You still think I belong here?" he whispered. I leaned in, smiling, voice steady. "No," I said. "I know it.